Hello, everybody. Good morning and welcome to our weekly media briefing with Montgomery County Executive Mark Elrich. I'm Lorna Virgilla, Hispanic Public Information Officer for Montgomery County Government. And joining us today, the whole team from HHS, Dr. Keisha Davis, the County Health Officer, Dr. James Bridgers, who is the Director of the Department of Health and Human Services, Dr. Nina Ashford, Chief of Public Health, as well as Mr. Sean O'Donnell, Acting Deputy Chief of Public Health Services, as well as Dr. Earl Stoddard, Assistant Chief Administrative Officer. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Mr. County Executive, good morning to you.
Yeah, good. It is morning. I'm used to this being noon. So good morning, everybody, and thank you again for joining us. How time flies. It gets confusing when you're having fun. I'm here in Annapolis again today, and we're working on the county's legislative agenda. And we're just about 1 month away from the end of the General Assembly session. And I'm optimistic we're going to see some movement on our key priorities. Next week, I'll be unveiling our FY25 operating budget. Like last year, the budget needs, requests, and wants are outpacing our revenue. This is not an unfamiliar refrain. It is not uncommon to have more requests and greater needs than the revenues are, and we're feeling it again this year. We aren't the only jurisdiction in the state with this problem. Pretty much everyone is facing a similar mismatch, and we see it in the state budget as well, as they're struggling even to close the gap in transportation, as well as other issues in terms of trying to fund services in the state. So revenues and needs are still on different trajectories, let's just put it that way. This is why I've been working pretty hard this session on a couple of important pieces of legislation that we need to provide more options to raise revenues in a fairer way, rather than across the board property tax hikes on residents, which has been more or less the normal way of doing things. We're looking to try to do things differently. Over the past month, I've testified multiple times and have met with numerous senators, delegates, and committee chairs and the governor's administration about the need for more local autonomy to raise revenues. And I'm pleased that the Maryland Association of Counties, as well as my fellow county executives, support this effort. And the significance of that is the Maryland Association of the Counties doesn't take positions on things like this unless there's broad support. And in this case, there are more Republican counties than there are Democratic counties in the state. And the Republican counties are feeling the same stresses and looking for the same autonomy that we're looking for. It's a great example of us all being able to work together on something that would benefit everyone. While Maryland counties must tax residential and commercial properties at the same rate, municipalities in the state are allowed to tax residential and commercial at different rates. But more importantly, particularly for Montgomery County's jurisdictions across the river, along with the District of Columbia, use differential tax rates to raise significantly more money from commercial development, which makes them less dependent on taxes on residents. And our system at the state and local level unfairly places the load for much of the infrastructure needed to spur economic development, infrastructure that greatly increases the value of commercial property and helps attract more investment. That load is placed primarily on residents. This is an inherently unfair system, and it ties our hands on what we can do with our budgets. This lack of flexibility affects all counties, whether they're big or small, urban or rural, or whether they want to raise or lower taxes. And with the state's resources for transportation running dry, counties realizing now that in order to have the means of addressing their own transportation needs, they need flexibility in how they raise their taxes. It's actually more important for everybody who's in this situation. If you think about, the evaporation of the $3.5 billion transportation fund, which in itself was never really able to fund all the projects that were across the state, that fund running dry confronted everybody with what do we do if there's no money? And we've kind of arrived at the point is what do we do if there's no money? Across the river in Virginia, they don't have this problem. Commercial property taxes are taxed at a much higher rate than residential. Businesses embrace higher taxes because they get transportation infrastructure. They get the infrastructure they need in order to attract businesses and to make a location an attractive place for development. And Montgomery County has struggled with this all the time I was on the council and all the time I've been county executive, never being able to generate enough local revenues to build the transportation that we need. And we're not alone in dealing with this. For over the last decade, Maryland's watched Virginia pretty much eat our lunch when it comes to economic development and business growth. Ironically, it was Republican governor with Republican legislature that enacted the higher tax system, as well as a regional taxing district in Northern Virginia. And over the same period, we heard on this side of the river is that we need to compete with them. This is a constant refrain about competing with Virginia, but most of the people who say that say it without saying, so let's do what Virginia does and adopt the tax rates that let you actually build infrastructure. I've said this over and over again, but if you think somebody's eating your lunch, you ought to look at how they got it. It's great to complain about it. It's, not very useful to say they got my lunch. It would be really helpful to unwind what they did differently that allowed them to be successful while we still struggled to attract businesses to the county. And we know it's not the tax rate. Just as a simple little sample, Montgomery County's tax rate's a little over $1.04. Fairfax County is about $1.09. They're proposing a 4-cent increase. They'll be at $1.13. Commercial property tax with that rate, their base is $1.25. And if you're in a special taxing district like Tyson's Corner, the infrastructure that you pay for there comes at the price of a tax rate that will be about $1.53 probably after the council over there is done. So they have a lot more money that they're able to put into infrastructure. The developers have always supported it because the infrastructure is what makes that place attractive. Any of us who've seen the transformation of Tyson's Corner can see with our own eyes what they're able to do with the infrastructure. We need to start taking a similar approach. We only have days left in this session to get something done, and I'm optimistic we can see passage of this legislation. I worry that if we continue to kick the can down the road on this debate, we're going to lose jobs, companies, and our talented workforce to neighbors across the river and elsewhere in the country. And I know that, there are people who say, that we need to be competitive and, we have to be competitive with Virginia. We have to be competitive in all ways. And truly, their ability to build things is one of the things that sets them apart. If you ask somebody in Virginia in the government of your corporation, and you said, I'm thinking about locating here, you've got this infrastructure in your master plans, when is it going to happen? Virginia could actually give you an answer, and they can tell you how they're going to pay for it. That's the question you can't answer in Montgomery County right now, because we have no idea when we're going to get the funding to pay for the projects we need. And we shouldn't be in this situation. It's time to change it. Another piece of legislation that I'm fighting for here in Annapolis is the Fair Share Act. Yesterday, I joined the state coalition behind Fair Share Maryland to advocate for changes in our tax system. We have major corporations here that pay no taxes here. No taxes. Maryland does not require combined reporting like 24 other states in D.C., which creates a giant loophole for corporations. The states that do combined reporting, they tax the profits of the corporations from the activities those corporations carry out in the states. They don't tax everything they make, but they tax revenue derived from activity in the states. Maryland does not do that. Here's some states that do that. Virginia, another tax that they have in Virginia that we don't have in Montgomery County. Virginia does this. New York does this. We had people say, Discovery left for New York because of your high taxes. And New York is higher tax than we are. And New York has combined reporting. Texas has combined reporting. Florida has combined reporting. West Virginia has combined reporting. Those are just some of the 24 states that have combined reporting. So in local competition now, one is crossing the river to get not lower taxes, but actually going there because the higher taxes actually build the kind of environment that they want to do business in. We are shooting ourselves in the foot. And as you can see from the following chart, the fair share income tax proposal would lower taxes on most households below $106,000 in income, and it would leave harmless households up to about $340,000 in income. Between $340,000 and $700,000, you get a minor tax increase, and you get a 0.7% tax increase if the income is over $772,000, which is the top 1%. So as you can see of this chart, about 95% of residents would either see a reduction in taxes or have their taxes stay the same, and only the higher incomes would wind up paying more income taxes. Fair share for Maryland would raise $1.6 billion in revenue each year to support good schools, healthcare, transportation, and the state workforce needed to deliver high-quality services. It would cut taxes for more than 1 million Marylanders. It would boost working families' incomes, would reduce child poverty, and strengthen our economy. It would ensure that the wealthiest 1% households pay their fair share, and they would set the average increase of less than 1% of their income. And they would support local Maryland-based businesses by ensuring a level playing field so that larger corporate competitors are also paying their fair in state and local taxes. Our small businesses pay taxes, and it puts them at a disadvantage when they're competing against companies that don't pay taxes, who may well compete in the same spaces. And it's important to realize this actually levels the playing field, not just for residents, but it could be used as a boon to small businesses in the state. It advances economic and racial justice by addressing aspects of Maryland's tax system that disproportionately benefit wealthy white households at the expense of Marylanders of color. And it's just the simple fact that if you look at income is very much differentiated along color lines in this state, probably in the country as well. It's a means of actually addressing some of that inequality. We often hear in government that we have to live within our means. It's my favorite thing I hear people say, and we hear it about our own budget. But I want to be clear that our means are self-defined, or you could say self-inflicted. There isn't some God on high that determines our tax rate. Our tax laws and our code aren't written in stone. So the decision to exclude people from being taxed in itself starts defining what our means are at both the state and the county level. And so the means are what we make our means. Having a fair tax system increases our means. And our means shouldn't be something defined by tradition and what happened in the past. It needs to be rooted in our hopes and needs for the future. And if you want, probably the most glaring example of being rooted in the past, is the Supreme Court looking at decisions and the Constitution in light of a mindset from 1790 versus the mindset in the 21st century. No doubt the people writing the same document in the 21st century probably would have written a slightly different document. It certainly wouldn't have had slavery in it, and it certainly would have recognized the political rights of people of color and women early on, rather than having to wait hundreds of years for things to get redressed. But fair taxation redefines our means, and that's what this Fair Share Tax Act accomplishes. If the legislation passes, it'll bring more money into the state and into our county budget to do what we need to do, and the state is struggling to meet the same needs that we are. I've been spending the last unpleasant week going over our budget and having to make reductions in things we thought were going to be in the budget. And most of the stuff we're reducing are things that I think if I told you what I was reducing, everybody would say, I wish we didn't have to do that. I wish we didn't have to do that. I wish we had more revenues. But without the revenues we need, this is where the collision between needs and budgets plays itself out. And I will tell you that when we send over the budget, there's a lot of good stuff in it, but it still doesn't deal with some of the things that we could have cut if we had a little bit more revenue. Most important thing that I want residents of the county and of the state to recognize in this discussion about fair share is that every dollar that we don't get from corporations increases the tax burden on residents. This is absolutely true. If we had the other revenues, we'd be looking at budgets from a different perspective. Without those revenues, and with our basically middle class and working class families paying these taxes and paying these different rates of taxes, it creates a real imbalance in the system. And a fair system, I think, is a better system. One of the other things I've been down here for is, speaking of education funding, I joined several county leaders from around Maryland in asking the State Education, Energy, Environment Committee to require school districts to bring clarity to their budgets. As you know, last year I supported an increase on property taxes because I saw how necessary it was to make teacher pay in Montgomery County competitive. As a refresher, The blueprint says that all jurisdictions in Maryland have to be at $60,000 starting pay by 2026. From Montgomery County and a couple of other counties, we recognize we have to be above that, because if you can get $60,000 anywhere in the state, and given the high cost of living in Montgomery County, Howard County, and some other places, being at the same level for everybody else is not going to make us competitive in terms of attracting teachers to come here. So we increased taxes to try to, bring our wages up to parity and where they're going to need to be. And that's where most of this money goes in the MCPS budget, is into teacher pay. The Senate Bill 1026, the Transparency in Education Spending Act, is passed. It's going to create uniformity across Maryland. It's going to require timely reporting of financial information that will help educators, parents, and the county government better understand spending that's within our education system. Right now, the education budget is kind of a black box. It's hard to tease out exactly where money goes and where money comes from. And over the years, and I spent 12 years on the council, trying to get accountability from the school board and the school system on their spending of money has been extraordinarily difficult. And I think one of the most frustrating things has been that this county has been very generously funding things to close the achievement gap. This was kind of like a requirement in our budgets going back to when I came on the council in 2006. The truth is, we fund a lot of programs. A lot of those programs aren't around. And we fund programs, and they may not all have a very long lifetime, but the money never reappears. We never get a budget where somebody says, this is money that came from this former program. We've discontinued the program. That money will be available in the next budget to do something different. That's not the kind of transparent discussion we have with the school system. And that's the kind of transparent discussion we need to be able to have with the school system. When they send over something that says this is for blueprint expenditures, we need to know what the blueprint expenditures are. They cannot lump blueprint expenditures along with things that aren't blueprint expenditures and say that everything's a blueprint expenditure when it is not a blueprint expenditure. So those are the things we struggle with, and we're just asking for reporting that lets you, me, everybody follow a school budget and understand where the dollars go, and when programs stop, where those dollars go, and when programs start, what are we paying for when the programs start? So that's a big issue down here, but it's another issue where both Democratic and Republican counties have come together with MECA to ask for this authority, because after all these years of trying to, in a cooperative way with the school systems, we realized that absent some kind of regulation to require them to report more accurately, we're going to continue to be frustrated in getting the information we need. I'm pleased that we've received good news and a positive development. It's going to help our police recruiting and recruitment and our staffing efforts. After Chief Jones announced his forthcoming retirement, I was asked by a reporter what is the top priority for a successor. My answer was immediate and pretty clear. We have to address our current staffing deficit. Not having enough officers is the biggest challenge that we have in current public safety. You can have all the policies you want. We can modify, procedures and do everything we can to make sure we have the best practices in place. But if we don't have sufficient police officers, we cannot put people where we need them on the street. And we have certainly had trouble recruiting. And one of the issues that's hampered our recruiting efforts has been the education requirement, and the second one has been the issue of prior cannabis usage. And current regulations in the state, promulgated by the board, the accrediting commission, says that you cannot have used cannabis up to 3 years from the time of application. The standard is far stricter than those applying in Virginia or the district, where an application could use cannabis up to the day of their application when they must stop. Since most individuals who apply to serve in law enforcement do so in their 20s, a 3-year cannabis ban, you can be pretty sure it deters many qualified applicants from coming to Montgomery County and going to other jurisdictions instead. This requirement is even more antiquated in a state that now allows recreational cannabis use for adults over 21. We've asked the commission to change the requirement to meet the current law, and they've so far refused to do it. And last week, the Attorney General issued an advice letter that supported our position that accrediting commission cannot consider past use of cannabis during the certification review of a new officer. Maryland Police Training and Standards Commission regulations still mandate no past consumption for 3 years prior to certification, or they require 2 years of drug testing if you ceased less than 3 years ago. This is a real impediment to our recruitment, and in light of the AG's letter, Montgomery County will be notifying the commission that we intend not to ask about past cannabis use of applicants during the recruitment process, and we will only require that applicants commit to not using marijuana moving forward during their training and during their career as an officer as required by federal law. So we will come in line with federal law, but we're going to remove one of these impediments to getting recruits to actually come to Montgomery County. And we're also have been hampered by our requirements for a college degree. And one of the things we're looking at is modifying that so you do not have to get a degree before you're a police officer. Our solution that we're moving toward is that we would hire officers without the required 60 credit degree, but we would require several courses as part of the education that they could take once they were hired as a police officer. Again, the requirement that you have this 60 credit degree is a real impediment to being able to hire people. And to say you have to go back to school and get the degree before you become a police officer can be very challenging for people who can't figure out how do I go to school and put a roof over my head at the same time. We think we can attract more recruits to the county if we make this change. One of the things I want to highlight ahead of my budget next week is give you a preview of what we're doing in economic development, which is another crucial source of development for our county. One of the things we've done is to look at our strengths and weaknesses as a life science center. We're happy to be ranked number 3, but we're particularly focused on what other centers have, which we don't have. We've been looking at, if you're picking Boston or San Francisco, what are you getting there that you're not getting here? And, what 2 things we do know, that commercial property and residential rents are higher in Boston and San Francisco because they're not going there because it's a lower cost area to locate in, but they're going there for other reasons. And so what you're going to see in our budget is about $27 million in funds for economic development. That's going to include innovation centers, a biohub in conjunction with the state. One of the needs that's been identified is a drug manufacturing facility for training. And in conjunction with the Maryland Tech Council, we will be bringing one of those to Montgomery County. We've been working with the Henry Jackson Foundation, and we're doing our first co-branded lab space with Henry Jackson in order to provide opportunities to small companies to get started. One of the biggest problems we have here that some of the jurisdictions don't have is we don't have small space. We could find somebody 1,000 feet or 1,200 feet. We don't have the smaller spaces, and we're looking to be able to create an incubator that has the smaller spaces where companies can start out in. They're able to start with minimal equipment and minimal hoods, and can actually grow their businesses from there. So we need to make sure we provide a facility that really is a starting facility. We're going to fund small businesses. We have a special fund we're creating for small businesses in high growth fields. We want to make sure that people who are getting started and ready to take the leap, that we're able to help assist them in the early stages of taking off. That fund and another fund for economic development is sufficiently funded for the moment. As I said, this budget has been challenging, but we're due 2 tranches of money from FEMA for a reimbursement for what we did during COVID, and some of these funds can be funded out of one-time money for FEMA. And so we're looking, when we get the second tranche, to add to the funds that are available to help support businesses in the county. And we're going to be expanding our outreach centers, our outreach efforts in the county. We have a very active and growing business center. They work around the county. They tour local small businesses. Their focus has been in our small business community and helping those businesses locate here sometimes, providing training and support and helping them grow. So we're going to have a lot more details about the budget when we get to you next week. Little news about the Purple Line. So here's a surprising thing. There's been another delay. And the Purple Line continues to disappoint. This project needs another $425 million to fund construction. The new estimated opening time is 2027, the end of 2027. The state's Board of Public Works is going to vote on this request next week. And even though this is something Governor Moore is now dealing with, this project truly went off the tracks under the leadership of the former Governor Larry Hogan. The overrun costs on this project have ballooned to a level of funding. You could have actually built the Purple Line as a subway. And that's really tragic. This was all done because it was considered less expensive than a subway. It is more expensive than bus rapid transit would have been. It has no better times than a bus rapid transit system would have had, but we made the choice of the light rail. This is now probably the most expensive light rail project in the world per mile, and that's not an accomplishment anybody should be really happy with. I wish it had not been so incredibly mismanaged by the former governor. And the P3 contract created a particular headache because normally if you have a P3, if you have disputes, you mediate them. We had a P3, but if you got in the dispute with the vendor had a right to walk. The vendor walked. The vendor wound up getting reimbursed for some of the claims they had. And the new vendor comes in and is not responsible for the engineering, any of the work that was done prior, and any of the designs going forward, and paid a premium to come up and finish the work that somebody else started. It shouldn't have happened, but it's happened. But I just want to be clear that when people see Purple Line delay and more funding, that they don't look at this governor for this mess, that this actually occurred long before Governor Moore came into office. There's still a lot of potential for new business growth and amenities and homes to be built along the Purple Line. But now it looks like it's close to 4 years off. It's a long time to get a project that could have been done much faster and had been done right. Let's hope that this comes into focus sooner or later. I guess finally, the CDC, I think as many people know, has shortened the isolation period for people with COVID. Americans with COVID or other diseases may return to daily activities if they don't have a fever and their symptoms are improving. And last week, the CDC announced new guidelines for preventing the spread of COVID-19 and other respiratory illnesses such as flu and RSV. It's a step that acknowledges the hard work that everybody did over the last 4 years. It also treats COVID-19 like other respiratory illnesses. The fact is, we're likely to see COVID-19 with spikes at different points in the year, just like we do with flu and RSV. But we remind people this is not the flu. It still has a death rate about 3 times what the flu is. So there's not much comfort to take from the fact that this is not the flu, or it's like the flu is a respiratory virus. You still have to be careful, and seniors and people with immunocompromised systems need especially to be careful. And with that, I'll turn it over to our public health team who can share details with you. So thank you all very much, and I'm back for questions later.
Thank you, Mr. County Executive. So we'll just go a little bit into the updated guidance from the CDC. This came out on March 1st, and it really is an attempt to simplify the recommendations for common respiratory illnesses like COVID, flu, and RSV. And the update is that for healthy, low-risk populations, COVID-19 is being treated like other respiratory illnesses. And the change is really based on data and based on the science, recognizing that we are in a different place now 4 years ago, just a few days after the anniversary of the first case of COVID in the state of Maryland. we are in a very different place. And a lot of that difference is driven by we have new ways of testing, we have vaccinations, and we also have medications that we didn't previously have. And so that allows us, and also recognizing that 98% of the population has some level of immunity from COVID, either from contracting the illness or from vaccination. We also see that the number of hospitalizations and deaths from COVID-19 are down. They have significantly decreased from their peak of 2.5 million in 2021 to 900,000 in 2023. COVID has dropped from the third leading cause of death to the 10th leading cause of death. And we're also seeing decreases in cases of long COVID. And so all of this is part of what has prompted the CDC to really say we should be thinking about COVID like we think about other respiratory illnesses, such as influenza and such as flu. I'll turn it to Dr. Ashford, who will talk a little bit about what this means for Montgomery County.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Davis. So what does this mean for Montgomery County? DHHS will align with the CDC's updated guidance for the public. As Dr. Davis mentioned, the guidance is rooted in 4 years of solid science and really makes sense for where we are at this phase of the pandemic. We're going to continue to work collaboratively with MCPS as medical officer as they determine how these changes will impact the guidance for our schools and our young people. MCPS follows the COVID-19 guidance that is received from the Maryland Department of Health, and they have not yet updated their guidance for school settings. So we'll continue to work closely with them as that information becomes available. We're also waiting for some additional guidance from the Maryland Department of Health on how these changes will impact our shelters and other congregate settings. So we're also in the process of updating our information online on our DHHS website to ensure that the public guidance is clear and that it's easy to understand and that everyone can find the information to make the decisions they need to keep themselves and their loved ones safe. I'll turn it back to Dr. Davis.
Specifically on what to do if you're sick, and this is where the change comes. If you're sick with a respiratory illness, regardless of what that is, COVID, flu, influenza, pneumonia, common cold, if you have a respiratory illness, you should stay home and away from others if you're sick, including people who you live around. And these symptoms can include fever, chills, fatigue, cough, runny nose, headache, among others. You can go back to normal activities when you've had at least 24 hours of both symptom improvement and no fever. I will take that. That's both your symptoms are getting better and fever-free without medication. So no fever without taking Tylenol or ibuprofen. Then you can go back to back out of isolation. There are additional prevention strategies that can help. So if folks are starting to return in public, we encourage them to wear a mask, social distancing, and take a test to help guide treatment. We know that if someone knows that they have COVID, getting treated early makes a difference. And so if someone is having respiratory symptoms, we do encourage them to get tested so they know if they need to be treated. There are 5 core prevention strategies. Immunizations make a huge difference. We know when we look at those who have been hospitalized, 95% of those who were hospitalized were not up to date on COVID booster. When we look at those who were hospitalized and those who died, the vast majority of them were not up to date on immunization. So that is one of the strongest tools in our toolbox for helping to prevent the spread. We also know good hygiene, so hand hygiene, washing your hands, covering your cough, all of those things make a difference. Taking steps to have cleaner air, whether that be air purifiers or just opening a window, getting treated, and then staying home to help prevent the spread. And I'll turn it to Sean just to show a little bit more of the data in terms of where we are right now.
Mr. O'Donnell?
Thank you. When I started sharing my screen, I couldn't find the unmute button. So I just want to share just a few quick data points. This is our wastewater surveillance. In orange is the volumes, on the left of COVID-19, on the right of influenza. And you can see that there's been transmissions found in the wastewater for both of these over the recent weeks. As you can see, even from last year to this year, blue are the confirmed cases on the left, and on the right are visits to outpatient centers with influenza mentioned in the notes. So you can see even from last year to this year, with the wastewater for COVID, we're seeing a lot fewer cases that are being documented compared to the transmissions. The notable thing about influenza here is that we had one spike earlier in winter, and now we are increasing again. So we are seeing a second increase in influenza right now, and we're just urging caution for folks. Influenza is not a light disease by any means. It can send people to the hospitals. It does cause deaths, unfortunately, every year. So, please take precautions. We're still in that respiratory disease window. So at this time, I'd like to see if there's any further comments from Dr. Bridgers or Dr. Stoddard.
Actually, we'll just go back to Dr. Ashford to wrap us up, and then pass to Dr. Bridgers and Dr. Stoddard.
Okay, thank you. So first, I think we just want to acknowledge there's a lot of mixed emotions about this change. The past 4 years, they've been incredibly challenging, and we're thankful that we continue to slowly make our way back to a sense of normalcy. We appreciate that many respiratory illnesses can present a greater threat to some individuals and symptoms, and time-based precautions are important in order to reduce that transmission. As Sean just highlighted, we're starting to see an uptick in our influenza cases. And one of the things that the CDC guidance does is says, it doesn't matter what respiratory illness you have, you need to take precautions. If you're sick, stay home. Don't re-enter the world until your fever has gone away or your symptoms have improved. So we understand and we empathize that many groups remain at increased risk due to less robust immune systems or their underlying health conditions. HHS, we're committed to reducing the prevalence and impacts of vaccine preventable diseases like COVID-19. For a while, we have been and will continue to do so and focus on these vulnerable populations and attempt to address disparities through outreach, education, coordination with our nursing homes, as well as access to vaccines and testing. We'll continue to conduct disease surveillance and reporting and target our resources to the individuals and populations that need them the most. So with that, I will turn it over to Dr. Bridgers or Dr. Stoddard.
Thank you, Public Health team, for that great update. The only thing that I would add from a Health and Human Services perspective is that the department will continue to use science and data to drive its community level outreach. So when there are increases in respiratory illnesses or distress, we will have more kits in the community, in the libraries, as we've done before. But we will be consistent with the federal guidelines, and our team will guide us. Thank you so much for that update.
And the only thing I'll say today is, obviously, I was in Annapolis yesterday testifying in the Senate Judicial Proceedings Committee on Senate Bills 939, 940. These are the bills named after Sergeant Pat Kemp, the name to address reckless and aggressive driving in the state of Maryland through both some criminal code changes as well as traffic article changes. I also want to thank Senator King in the Senate for being our sponsor there. Then we were all over in the House Judiciary Committee for Bill 1111, sponsored by Delegate Wims, which was the cross file of one of those Senate bills. I previously testified last week on behalf of the county, the entire county, the county executive and the county council. Sergeant Kemp did testify yesterday and did testify last week as well in Annapolis, as well as other members from the police department. The state's attorney's office was there yesterday as well, and so this was a full team effort. Council member Ludke testified as well. So we're obviously very committed to seeing passage of that legislation and to address the reckless driving and issues that we see in Maryland. And frankly, we received pretty bipartisan support from members of both the Senate and House on passage of those bills. So looking forward to it.
Thank you, Dr. Stoddard and HHS team, for that update. Members of the media, we're going to open it up right now for the Q&A portion of this presentation. Please do raise your hand. And I see Talia Varela from Univision DC. Go ahead, Talia. Good afternoon.
Hi, good morning. Thank you so much for taking my question. And this would be for the county executive regarding the shortage of police officers. I would like to know, how is the shortage of police officers affecting the safety in the community and the crime rates? Is it also affecting the way that police officers respond to emergency calls?
It probably has the least effect on emergency calls. Probably the biggest effect is on non-emergency calls, where you might have to wait longer. Say if you come home and you discover your garage is broken into, and there's, stuff is gone, there's nobody there around who you can find. That's the kind of thing that might be delayed, but emergencies are emergencies and they get dispatched as emergencies. I think the day-to-day effect is when you're down as many officers as we are, you don't have patrols that are as fully staffed. And so obviously fewer vehicles out on patrol means you're not patrolling as much of the area in the same time as you'd otherwise be able to. I had that experience. I did a ride along in one of the districts, and I did the evening ride along, and they went out understaffed. The minimum was supposed to be 10 people. They would have liked to have had more. That would have been more cars, but they went out with 9 because they got to go out. And so it meant basically these folks are running from call to call to call. It wasn't like you were proactively, driving down the street. Most of the time you get a call and somebody's being pulled into a call. And so that, I think, is the biggest impact on us, has been coverage of areas and being able to have enough people to more quickly not just respond to calls, but have them proactively driving through communities. We, use overtime. We've, done all the things we can do internally. We're trying to address this by, first of all, we had the signing bonus. Second, getting rid of the cannabis prohibition will probably allow more people to come here. Because if you want to be a police officer and you see jurisdictions that'll say, as long as you don't smoke after you start your training, you can go there. You have Montgomery County that says, if you tell us you smoked in the last 3 years, nobody wants to lie during the interview, then you can't come to Montgomery County. That's a real problem for us. And I think the education requirement is also a problem. We get people, get out of high school, maybe they go to work, they decide they want to be a police officer, and then you're confronted, well, you got to go get the 60 credit degree. And I know lots of people for whom going out and getting 60 credits and trying to figure out, how do I go to school and work at the same time? It's hard enough as it is, but it may mean it takes you longer than 2 years. So we've got some obstacles we're going to remove further to make sure that we're able to enhance recruitment. And we've hired a recruiting firm that was able to demonstrate in Fairfax County, where they were able to have recruit classes larger than ours last year, that because of the way they targeted and did things, they were more successful. We're hoping that their approach can also be successful here.
Perfect. Thank you so much for that. And just a quick follow-up question. I don't know if you mentioned how short Montgomery is of police officers, but also in Virginia, there was a proposal of a bill that would allow DACA recipients to apply for law enforcement positions. Is that something that could also help Montgomery? Is that something that you would consider, that you think that would be something that would help?
Yeah, I think that would be a good thing. I think some of our restrictions don't make sense. People are making this their permanent home. They're investing here. They're buying houses here, doing everything everybody else would do. We should remove barriers that are strictly artificial. And as long as somebody's got a clean record, and I'm more interested in, in people who have not gotten in trouble with the police and have no evidence of being problematic, we ought to be able to recruit them regardless of status.
Did you mention how short we are of police officers?
Yeah, I actually got the number this morning. It's at 172. We do anticipate that. I mean, it goes up. It fluctuates regularly, and so I think that we're going to be giving an update in March, and we do expect. We get a recruit class in, it drops by 22. I think this was last recent round. Then it starts to get one or two a month retire or whatnot. So it'll continue to creep up until our next recruit class graduates. And I did want to add. So I think very recently, I think a couple of years ago, there was state law change that allowed green card holders to become police officers. But obviously, as the county executive said, we'd be very much in favor of allowing DACA or other, those in different immigration statuses to be able to become police officers.
So you said 172 short. So what is the ideal number of police officers?
Yeah, so the complement, I believe, is 1279. And so obviously we're 172 below that number currently.
Thank you.
Thank you, Thalia. Up next, Adam Kass, NBC4. Good afternoon, Adam.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having this briefing, as always. County Executive Elrich, you said regarding the Purple Line that it could be a subway system. Are you saying that at this cost, it should have been built as part of the metro system?
Well, frankly, if you consciously decided you were going to spend this much money, which people didn't think they were consciously deciding, but if you're going to spend this much money, it should have been a subway. Flat out. It would have been less disruptive. It wouldn't have caused, as much delay. It wouldn't have, messed up as many roads. It would have, and probably would have been done faster. But that wasn't the path they took. I mean, the thing about subways were like, I don't know what the latest number is, but when we were looking at things like bus rapid transit and light rail, subways were out there at about $300 to $400 million a mile. And, nobody envisioned, having that kind of money. So the light rail was the fallback. And, I would say the other default would have been bus rapid transit.
Yeah, but by that logic, does it even make sense at this point? I mean, obviously the project is going forward with delays and cost over. The day it opens, will it make sense?
Well, it'll be there. And the day it'll have riders, and hopefully it'll provide some of the benefit. If somebody did an evaluation and said, if you stopped this and replaced it with the bus system, would you be able to deliver it under the projected price of building this out as light rail? That would be an interesting question. But that's the question you'd have to ask. I mean, since bus rapid transit didn't require much special treatment, even the tunnel in Silver Spring that goes up to the Long Branch station would have been required because the train couldn't climb the hill, but the buses could have climbed the hill. But that cost is already sunk. So that's nothing you could save. So what you'd save is, the decision to take the lanes and paint them red versus the decision to put rails into all the lanes that exist. That would be your big savings. Obviously, the time needed to do one would be less than the time needed to do the other. But that's a decision that people would really have to evaluate and see whether they'd actually save money at the end of the day. But there was a time when they probably realized these costs are going out of control. They probably should have reevaluated. But that was back in Hogan's time, and that wasn't going to happen.
Yeah, and my last question on this, not to take up too much time. I mean, obviously, something has to happen. I know it's not necessarily on your watch. You're saying a lot about Governor Hogan, but what do you say to the residents and the businesses who are continue to having to deal with this scar that's just been cut through two counties?
I tell them that I sympathize with them. We've tried to provide money to affected businesses, particularly in Silver Spring. We have a small area that's intensely impacted businesses, and so we've provided money in previous years to help them weather this. For them, it's been extraordinarily difficult. Everybody else, we're just suffering with this stuff. I happen to live in Tacoma Park, and going through Silver Spring is an unavoidable part of what I do most days. And it's just sad to see the mess that's being created. And it was really sad to see the mess just sit there during the period between losing one contractor and bringing on the other contractor. I'd say this thing has been so grossly mismanaged, and it's probably one of the best reasons not to support the governor's P3 agreement on I-270 and the Beltway, because he demonstrated in this project that he couldn't handle a P3. He shuddered to think what it would have been if they had tried doing this on the other project.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Adam. Kevin Dupree, DC News Now. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. To begin, can you please talk about the decision to withdraw support of Charles Bailey for the fire chief position?
Can I talk about what?
The decision? The decision to withdraw support of Charles Bailey for the fire chief position?
Look, it's pretty straightforward. We have a process where the executive sends over to the council, a candidate, and assuming that after the council individually ponders this, that we would continue to bring the candidate forward. And knowing that we did not have the votes on the council, there was no point in putting it back out there.
Gotcha. Thank you very much for sharing that. And so the decision had nothing to do with the Inspector General's report about misconduct from a senior official in Montgomery County Fire?
I can't talk about personnel issues. I think you guys know that. But I'll just say I was ready to put them forward again.
Thank you. And then the last question I have for you, can you talk a little bit about the timeline for when the county would like to have its next fire chief?
Obviously, as soon as possible. We'll appoint an acting. We have a really good candidate for an acting. In fact, that person might have been a candidate for the job had they not gone into the drop program. There's another candidate also available over there. So we have competent people that we can call on to lead the department in the interim. And we're going to have a discussion of what kind of search to do. We, again, may go back internally. I think one of the advantages of an internal officer was, let's say, they know the system. Montgomery County has not a typical system of a combined volunteer and career system, and the career component is the largest part of it. We have significant volunteer participation. We have a union environment. Not everybody has worked in environments like that, and we have a large system. And so candidates who came from small systems really don't understand what we're doing in Montgomery County necessarily, or do not feel comfortable they'd be in position to look at what we need to do moving forward. And I think one of the biggest things is we know just from our data that the calls for fire and rescue are increasingly becoming health related rather than fire related. And it would be nice to have somebody who's A, aware of that, B, potentially has been in the department that's been trying to manage, do the change management that system requires anyway. And that's one advantage an internal candidate would have, because we've been talking about the need to increase focus on delivery of ambulance, rescue services, and not every solution being building a fireplace. Building a fire station. Every time you think you have a service delivery issue, if it's a service in terms of response to health issues, a fire station may not be the solution. For example, mobile ambulances may be a better solution. So that's what I'm looking for, and we'll make a determination whether we've got an internal candidate or not, and if we don't, we'll cast a broader net.
All right, great. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, Kevin. Kate Ryan, WTOP. Good afternoon, Kate.
Hey, good afternoon. Couple of questions. I want to double back to the Purple Line for just a second. In terms of, and you've talked about, how neighborhoods have been affected by this. Do we have a dollar amount in the hit that local businesses may have taken while they wait out this project? And do we also have an idea of the benefits that may accrue by having this? Do we have an updated estimated ridership on the Purple Line that makes it worth the pain? Can you tell people, I know this was tough, but it's going to be worth it?
We do not have the state hasn't done any updated ridership estimates as far as I know. That might be interesting, but they have not done that. The state passed legislation that helped provide funding that we could try to find out from you if the loss of revenue to businesses was part of the background information on that legislation. So I will try to get my staff to dig into this a little bit and then try to get back to you with an answer.
Thank you. And then moving to again, and I hate to keep going after this, but on the fire chief,
yes.
I did have a note from the IAFF union president who said on half a dozen occasions, and he goes, they raised concerns going November 28th, June 28th, July 31st, August 8th, August 17th, and most lately in November of 23, that they said, look, we've raised these with you before, and they feel that they were simply ignored. Can you?
They actually weren't ignored. What we did was the normal thing. We went back through HR and the reporting processes in the department. Not a single thing that they listed appeared in any record of having been ever raised with personnel or raised with the fire chief, ever. And so it's very interesting that these suddenly pop up. I'll point out that at the same time they're doing this, they're trying to push me to hire a fire chief who's running a five-station department and was a former union president for 11 years. So I would say that, their motivations were pretty much trying to knock off one candidate and make room for another candidate. And it really bothers me. He talks about a letter he wrote. He never mentioned anybody's name but the past fire chief. And he asked me to fire him, which we weren't going to do because he knew he was going to be leaving because he was in the drop. And we were preparing for what we were going to do to bring in another fire chief. I asked him verbally about the candidates. I mentioned Charles's name, and he said he could work with them. He actually, at one point, when he was dissatisfied with the way the previous chief had handled discipline issues, said he'd prefer that Charles handled those issues. We did that. So I would say this is very complicated, but you're not seeing everything to this. And I am not interested in belaboring this. The union succeeded in getting what they wanted, at least in terms of not getting this chief. I still feel, and I know that most of the people who did the interviews feel this is the best, certainly the best qualified candidate we had. Absolutely.
Gotcha. And when you're referring to we're talking about Jeffrey Buttle, president of IA.
Yep.
And then switching to police, and again, candidate for the next chief. Where are we specifically in that? As you're trying to beef up the numbers there, how are we doing in terms of naming that next chief? And as you said, in the fire department, you have some people in mind that you think know the system, would be good. You have the same sense within the police department.
Look, I think we've got some good potential candidates there. And I'll say the same thing. Montgomery County is kind of unique. One thing I'll say about a few things I guess I'm going to say. One is that I think our police department is better than most. I think it's one of the best in the country. They keep us out of the headlines. The kind of incidents that often occur in other departments don't happen here. I feel like it's been well managed. It's unfortunately been understaffed for a number of years, but I think, and basically it's been well managed. I think, we've brought the department through some changes, a lot of the work around, racial equity, social justice, had brought us to look at, how we needed to change some of our processes. I'd say the department, maybe they're not jumping down with joy, certainly wasn't resistant and didn't throw barriers up to us being able to make those changes. And I appreciate the current chief for doing that. I know he may not have liked everything possibly that we did, but I felt he, carried out what we were trying to do. And I think over time, officers have realized this is really not what it has not brought to them, or it's not as fearful as I think people once thought. I will point out that we managed to do this, and I resisted from the beginning the notion of defunding the police. I always tried to tell people that, we've got a responsibility to provide public safety, and we've got this responsibility to address social needs, and that we actually can do both. We can walk and chew gum at the same time. And I don't believe we had to defund police in order to make room for social spending. Ultimately, the hope is that as we strengthen our communities and we educate our kids better, which is one of our major issues, I think, and we provide alternative activities. We leave kids leaving high school with the prospect of actually getting a job, as opposed to, if I'm not going to college, I've been prepared not to do anything. And we address those issues. That's the time you might see the need for reduced policing, as people feel they can act as full members of the community and have successful lives rather than feeling like I've got no future. What difference does it make? If we can change some of that dynamic, I think you get to a place where you don't have the crime that requires necessarily the level of policing we have. But I want to see the change in, what we're doing and the outcomes, and then the police staffing will follow. But we did not make a choice between one and the other.
Got it. And then timeline for possible new chief being named?
I think both, the leadership in the department that's going to be there after Chief Jones leaves and the union both would prefer an earlier decision with a longer transition. And we're hoping that, we can reach a decision that achieves that.
Thank you.
Kate, we did receive a letter from the council president and the public safety chair, Mr. Katz, requesting some details about the process, and we will be responding to that letter with a memo from the county executive, hopefully by the end of the day tomorrow, which I think will answer some more of your questions. I don't want, obviously, we've described what we think our timeline and process will be. I don't want to get ahead of responding to the council's request, but I'm happy to provide that letter once the council receives it.
Terrific. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kate. Heather Curtis, WMAL Radio. Good afternoon, Heather.
Good afternoon. So, County Executive Elrich, you were talking about the Fair Share Act, and Governor Moore had told reporters last week, we don't need to raise taxes now, and he thinks that the bar for raising taxes would be very high, and obviously the plan does lower taxes for some lower income people. But what are your thoughts on that, on, being able to get that to pass and get the legislature to approve higher taxes for wealthier people?
I think this, it's a really unfortunate dilemma that we've boxed ourselves into. The legislature has serious revenue shortfall issues. The governor, has made that really clear. Absent revenues, there's going to be a real problem addressing basic needs in the state and frankly in the counties as well. And, one of the things that gets sacrificed is the inability to provide transportation. So basically you put yourself in a position where you're not competitive with jurisdictions around you. And I have a pretty firm belief that you've got to set yourself up to be able to provide the kind of infrastructure and services that people expect if your aspirations are to be like the counties you look at and say, well, why can't we do what they're doing? There's no way of getting to there but by following a path that gets you there. And the problem, obviously, is you could raise the revenues, but no one wants to raise the taxes on residents. So this automatically becomes a poison pill. And frankly, we've dealt with this in the county. If we tried to build bus rapid transit on our current tax structure, the bulk of the cost would derive to the residents, the bulk of the benefits would derive to property owners. It doesn't take a rocket scientist to figure that equation out. And residents, do not want to be bearing the load for infrastructure improvements that increase property and increase the values, and they don't particularly benefit from in the same way. And I get it. But, political leaders don't want to raise taxes on the residents, and so you wind up in this paralysis. So you don't raise taxes for things you need, and you declare victory on taxes, but you don't provide what you need, which digs you into a deeper hole and makes you less competitive. I think people have got to once and for all recognize there's a need to tax. There's a need to have a fair tax system that doesn't rely so much on the working class and the middle class, and that really puts taxes back, where they belong. The 50s saw the great explosion of progress in the United States, and, public works projects and the growth of industries and companies had tax rates that are dwarf the tax rates we had today. And yet they saw astounding growth because of those things, because they built stuff and they invested in things. And I think we've turned expenditures into a dirty word. Anytime you want to spend money, it's an expense. We don't think of it as an investment. No business person would do their business that way. If they needed to make an investment to be more competitive, they would make the investment. They wouldn't fold up their tents and go home. And I think we've just adopted the wrong mentality. And I think it doesn't help by having a political system that allows far too much money influence in the political system. So we're dealing with a lot of things that make doing this harder, but I think we have to do it. mean, I don't know what to say to people when, that people aren't going to come here if you can't deliver infrastructure. We've talked with consultants who, work with as advisors, both to county governments and the businesses, and they've told us flat out that in Virginia, if somebody wants to know when something's going to be built, and can something be built in time for them to move their business there, they can give them a time. They can tell them how they're going to pay for it. If you ask that same question in Montgomery County, Purple Line being a great example, at what date am I going to tell you the Purple Line is going to come here? And how am I going to fund this thing? The states, they're going back. It's a good thing the state's the backstop. But if we were the county trying to do this with our revenues, we wouldn't be able to answer that question. And so we really need these changes. And if people don't make the changes, they should really stop talking about economic development and why we don't compete with Virginia, because if you're not willing to look at what they do and imitate any of it, it's a real struggle to figure out how you're going to actually be competitive with them. And I think that's unfortunate, because we have, I think, in many ways, better assets and have a lot of strengths that I would stack Montgomery County up against anybody. But our lack of ability to build infrastructure is not our strength. It's a real weakness.
I have a question about another bill. Next week, the House Ways and Means Committee is taking up a bill that would lower the state sales tax rate, but expand the sales tax to include a whole bunch more services that aren't taxed now. What are your thoughts on that in terms of raising revenue?
I actually like it. I mean, it's another example. Here's a tax that lands on all residents. And mostly us folks who go to stores and buy things. So the idea that if you hire an architect and you're not paying any tax on the architectural services, or any number of professional services for which there are no taxes, there's no reason why those things are included. I will say Fairfax goes farther than us. They tax food. I do not want to get to the point that we're taxing food, but it's just another example of where you could make this fair. You could, people hiring, contractors to do, millions of dollars of projects, or, consultants. If they're spending that much money, they could certainly afford to pay tax on it. It would be a way of shifting some of the burden off of residents, and I'd be more than happy to do that. I will say in Fairfax County, they get 0.7 cents of the sales tax is dedicated to the transportation projects in Fairfax County. Another thing we don't have in Montgomery County.
Thank you, Heather. I believe Tommy Tucker from Montgomery Community Media has questions. Hello, Tommy. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon. Thank you. With the delays to the Purple Line, how important are smaller projects like the dedicated bus lanes in Wheaton and other small projects throughout the county?
Well, I hope they're not so small projects. We really, our goal, one of the first BRT lines connects Wheaton to Rockville. It closes the north end of the red line so that you can actually get to both ends of the red line. And obviously, once you get to Rockville, you can move up and down. You can move down the Pike by train. You can go up the Pike, up to Shady Grove by train. But after that, we're planning a BRT network on 355 that runs all the way to Clarksburg. So that's one of those critical pieces of infrastructure that we would put in place. The 355 BRT is really important because we're trying to pack this development into White Flint. But even the previous governor, he recognized that when he was trying to attract Amazon there, that if we attract that much business there, you actually have to have transportation infrastructure. And he had a plan to actually build 3 BRT lines in the offer to Amazon. And we think that with life sciences, we can actually build about the same amount of square footage over the same time period as the Amazon project would have done. We need a transit response that gets us that capacity. So these are important to us, and being not able to fund these things properly is not good. It makes things a struggle that shouldn't be a struggle.
Any follow-up questions? Tommy?
I was saying thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Members of the media, any more questions before we wrap it up for today? Raise your hand. No more questions?
All right, we have come to the moment that we've all been waiting for. So I'm going to ask our speakers and dignitaries to come on up here. We have a pair of golden scissors as they come through the crowd.